Hello everyone, and welcome back to another explosive episode of Nuclear Revenge. Today, I've got 3 jaw-dropping tales you won't want to miss. If you enjoy stories like these, like and subscribe to help this channel grow. This first story's titled The Technician's Revenge. My name is David. I spent 18 years in one office, on one floor, in one chair that slowly ground a divot into my spine. I wasn't chasing glory, I just wanted stability. A desk, a paycheck, and to be left alone. I gave them everything, my weekends, my hairline, my damn vertebrae. I thought loyalty meant some rains effing. I was wrong. It started with a merger. That's what they called it, a strategic alignment of resources and talent, but we all knew what it was. A quiet slaughter. The kind where people don't even get told to pack their desks. One morning the badge stops working, and suddenly you're a non-person. The new leadership came in wearing smiles and silk ties. They shook hands, sat through orientation, then started pruning. Not based on performance. No, that would have made sense. They wanted fresh blood, cheaper labor, disposable youth. So they started leaning on us, the old guard, finding fault in the smallest things. That's how I met Jordan. He was brought in as transition coordinator, which was code for hatchet man. Mid-30s, MBA. The kind of guy who used the word synergy unironically and kept a motivational quote framed on his desk. He was assigned to evaluate operations continuity in my department. Translation: watch us, document our flaws, and start slicing. I tried to play nice, answered his questions, sat through his fake-friendly performance reviews, but Jordan had already decided I was dead weight. He just needed documentation to prove it. Within 2 months, I had 2 written warnings. First was for non-collaborative communication, because I didn't CC enough people on an email. The second was for workflow inefficiency, citing a misfiled report that was never proven to be mine. Then came the mandatory coaching sessions. Jordan would close the door, lean back in his chair, and pretend to be concerned. "You know, David," he'd say, steepling his fingers like some caricature of a psychologist, "you've got decades of experience here, but culture fit is just as important as skill set. You get that, right?" I nodded, said nothing. I'd seen this script before. At home, Dana started seeing the cracks. I came home silent, jaw locked, tension rippling through my back. Our daughter, Ellie, asked if I was mad at her. That gutted me. The final blow came on a Friday. Jordan asked me to join him in conference room B. When I walked in, HR was already seated. A sealed envelope sat on the table. No preamble, no discussion, just a recited termination clause and a courtesy offer of a month's severance if I signed a non-disclosure agreement. I didn't sign it. They revoked my badge that afternoon. The walk out of the building was worse than any death. I'd spent more time in that office than I had with my own daughter. Now I didn't even get a goodbye. Jordan didn't look at me as I passed his glass-walled office. He didn't need to. He thought he'd won. He thought I was finished. He didn't know I was just getting started. The Monday after my termination, I woke up at 6 a.m. anyway. Not out of habit, out of purpose. You see, I hadn't spent 18 years in that building without learning its skeleton, its arteries, its hidden weak points. And I hadn't just survived in that company, I'd built parts of it. The old project archive system? I wrote half the macros. The financial reporting templates Jordan was using? Designed those before he graduated college. So I started digging. Not inside their servers, I didn't need to break any laws. I had backup files, notes, printed project logs and binders they'd forgotten existed. I knew how the quarterly goals were fudged, where expenses were buried under mislabeled departmental costs. I knew the nicknames people used in back-channel Slack groups, the ones Jordan thought he controlled. I didn't go nuclear. I went meticulous. First, I waited. Corporate restructures always leave dust. People step on toes. Tensions flare. I kept tabs on LinkedIn, watched who left, who changed titles. I made a burner Gmail, joined a few niche industry forums, and dropped innocuous complaints about how certain modern-minded managers were misleading clients. Jordan's name started popping up in whispers. Then came phase 2, corrosion. I contacted Michelle. She was a senior account director who'd quietly left after the merger. She and I had shared more than a few war stories. I called her under a different name, pitched myself as a freelance consultant, said I'd heard things weren't going well since the merger, that Jordan was cooking delivery numbers. I gave her specifics, how a quarterly report had smoothed out client churn by folding in pre-book renewals from Q2, how internal notes from canceled projects were being reclassified as strategy development. All traceable, all true. She asked how I knew. I was there before he was. She didn't ask further. 2 weeks later, an anonymous document packet was sent to compliance. Not from me, but everything in it was seeded by me. Phase 3, optics. Jordan was a talker. He'd started building a public brand, guest blogging, speaking at conferences, preaching about corporate transparency. So I fed that image back into itself, planted little contradictions online, careful, and small. Linked to a ghost medium blog where I dissected hollow corporate speak. Quoted lines from his own bio against leaked internal language from the company's onboarding memos. I knew which journalists followed which signals. One of them picked it up. A piece ran in a mid-tier trade mag titled, "How Startups Weaponize Transparency, a Case Study in Doublespeak." No name, but it quoted the blog, which quoted Jordan. By now, internal confidence was crumbling. I heard through Michelle that an audit had been ordered, not just into the financials, but the HR handling of terminations and promotions since the merger. And that's when I delivered the kill shot. You see, before I left, I copied a single file. It wasn't a report. It was a video. Security footage from conference room B, me, sitting down, being handed my termination letter. It was supposed to be deleted after 30 days, but facilities had a redundancy drive, and I had access. The audio was clear. Jordan's voice, saying, "We just need you out of the way, David. No offense. You're not a good cultural match anymore." He thought HR wouldn't care, that they wouldn't report it upward. He was wrong. I sent it anonymously to the ethics board of the parent company. No commentary, no demand, just the clip. Timestamped. The fallout came fast. Jordan was reassigned to a non-operational role within a week. His speaking engagements were quietly cancelled. His public profile stopped updating. Rumors swirled. Some said he was under investigation, others that he'd taken leave for personal reasons. I didn't care. I'd already won. But there was one thing left to do. I put on a suit. Not the cheap one I used to wear in that office, the real one. The one I wore to my wedding. I walked into the building with a visitor badge Michelle had arranged. Walked past the glass offices, past the conference rooms, past the new faces who didn't know me, and the old ones who looked away. I stopped outside the hollowed-out office Jordan used to occupy. Empty. Then I turned, walked to the elevator, and rode it down to the lobby. A security guard nodded at me. I nodded back, and laughed. A year later, I run my own consultancy. Small team, good clients, no bullshit. My daughter asked me last week why I left my old job. I told her sometimes people mistake quiet for weakness, but quiet is where the storm begins. This next story is titled The Furnace Room Fallout. My name's Alan. For most of my life, I believed in playing it straight. Keep your head down, work hard, don't rock the boat, simple rules for a simple life. I never imagined that blind loyalty to decency would get me chewed up and spit out like garbage, but that's exactly what happened. I was 42 when I got hired on at the plant. After 2 decades of blue-collar grind factories, warehouses, HVAC gigs, I finally landed something solid. Union benefits, overtime bonuses, even a half-decent pension plan. Dana, my wife, cried when I brought home the first paycheck. After her spinal surgery and months of rehab, we were drowning in debt, and our son Jake had just started 4th grade. It felt like a lifeline. The facility was massive, buried in the industrial edge of the city. On paper, it specialized in electrical components, but in practice, it handled everything from lithium treatments to metal annealing. My assigned post? The furnace room, a sub-level complex that looked like a cross between a foundry and a boiler pit from hell. Kills ran 24/7, steam hissed from fractured valves, and temperatures in the walkways regularly hit 130 degrees. But the machinery didn't scare me. My supervisor did. Grant Palmer, tall, athletic, always with a jawline freshly shaved and a clipboard tucked under one arm like a drill sergeant. At first glance, he seemed like the kind of guy who took pride in order, the type who'd served in the military or maybe managed a firehouse before getting into operations. But behind the square smile and khaki uniform was something colder, crueler. He didn't yell. He didn't need to. His power was in the quiet control, the way he'd let your mistakes stew before calling you into his office. How he'd sit across from you, arms folded, letting the silence stretch until you cracked and started justifying things he already knew. His favorite game was shame, public corrections over the intercom, posting crew errors on the hallway whiteboards, snide jabs masked as team-building banter during morning safety meetings. I kept my head down, did my hours, took the overtime. When a guy named Leo got reassigned to the outdoor tank line because he filed a complaint about improper break times, I got the message loud and clear. But Grant still had a way of finding you. My mistake came during a graveyard shift on a Tuesday. We just finished clearing residue from Furnace 6, and I was logging data into the output console. The system was sluggish that night, and I accidentally entered the previous cycle's PSI instead of the live readout, caught it 45 minutes later and corrected it. In any other facility, that would have been nothing. Here, it was blood in the water. The next morning, Grant called me into control. He didn't say a word at first, just clicked through surveillance footage until he landed on the moment I typed the entry. Then he hit play, over and over. A loop of me staring at the console, punching keys. "Do you know what happens when a system believes the pressure is lower than it actually is?" he asked without looking at me. "It triggers early cool down," I said, but I corrected it before. He raised a hand, cutting me off. I'm not interested in the correction. I'm interested in the oversight. Then came the clipboard, a formal write-up, 3-day unpaid suspension, negligence during critical data logging, signed and already filed. He didn't yell, just smiled that tight-lipped smirk and tapped the desk. Don't think you're untouchable just because you keep your mouth shut. Everyone bleeds here eventually. I walked out of that room with my heart pounding and my knuckles white. That was the moment something broke in me. Not from the write-up, not even from the money I'd lose during the suspension, but from the realization that no amount of obedience would shield me. Grant was going to gut me eventually, and he didn't just want me gone. He wanted me humiliated first. I spent the first day of my suspension sitting at my kitchen table in silence. Dana kept asking what happened, but I didn't have the words. I stared at the window, watching the condensation drip down the glass. I'd done everything right, followed every rule, worked through breaks, took the worst shifts without complaint, and it still wasn't enough. That night I drove out to the plant, parked in the lot across from the fence line, and just watched the lights. The low orange glow from the basement windows where the furnaces roared, the occasional shadows moving past. I wasn't planning anything yet, just absorbing, letting the shape of it settle inside me. I returned to work 3 days later, quieter than before. I stopped talking to the other guys, stopped eating lunch in the break room. I became invisible, and when you're invisible, people forget you're watching. Grant didn't. He started assigning me cleanup duties that didn't match my role, asked me to rewrite daily reports to his standards even when they'd already been submitted. Once, he had me repaint a portion of the back stairwell with a toothbrush, but I endured, and while I endured, I studied. The furnace room's layout hadn't changed in 20 years. I knew where every pipe, circuit relay, access panel, and maintenance hatch was. Knew which CCTV feeds were real and which were dummies, old, unplugged cams used to give the illusion of full coverage. Grant's obsession with control had a weakness. He thought knowing everything meant owning everything. He never considered someone might know more. My plan started with the water sensors. The emergency deluge system in furnace room 3 was only supposed to trigger if temperatures spiked past 1,200 degrees Fahrenheit with no cool-down response. A safety fail-safe, but it could be tripped manually if someone had access to the junction box behind the south panel. I had that access. Over a week, during my scheduled maintenance punishments, I rewired a bypass using scrap relay pins and grounded it through an unused conduit, completely invisible unless you dismantled the box. When you triggered it, it would flood the interior and short out the system. Harmless if everyone evacuated. Catastrophic if someone was still inside trying to override it manually. But I wasn't going to hurt anyone. I just needed to lure Grant into making a mistake. The second step was bait. I found it in the inspection logs. Grant had been falsifying performance reports. Not just padding hours, but forging heat efficiency numbers to meet quarterly goals. That's why the maintenance was always rushed. Why guys like Leo and I got blamed for anomalies. He'd been covering his own ass. I copied the logs, printed the real sensor reads, and left them in an unmarked envelope on the lead inspector's desk the day before an unannounced walkthrough. 2 days later, chaos erupted. The furnace room was flagged for audit. Grant's numbers didn't line up. They weren't enough to fire him, not yet, but enough to piss him off. And like any predator, when wounded, he got sloppy. He started working longer hours, micromanaging everything, running diagnostics himself. I waited for my moment. It came on a Monday, when Grant stayed late to double-check calibration data. I knew his routine. He'd walk furnace 3 first, then hit the control room to log the data. Between those two steps was the blind corridor past the junction box. I waited until I saw his figure pass through on the monitor. Then I hit the bypass. Sirens howled. Red lights flared. Furnace 3 triggered a full emergency deluge. Grant had maybe 30 seconds to make a decision, and I knew which one he'd choose. He'd go in, try to override it from the interior panel, and play the hero. He did, but when he accessed the panel, all he found was a looping error code and a high-pressure valve lockout. He couldn't stop the flood, couldn't override the release. He slipped in the soaked floor and banged his shoulder hard enough to leave a bruise. By the time he got out, the whole section was submerged, and the mainboard was fried. In the investigation that followed, they reviewed the override logs, and they found discrepancies. Why was Grant entering override codes during an automated safety event? Why were sensor readings inconsistent with logged outputs? Why had this furnace been calibrated to a lower threshold than required? It didn't take long for the questions to stack, and I didn't have to say a word. The audit turned into a formal inquiry. The formal inquiry turned into a disciplinary hearing. They found altered maintenance reports, delayed inspections, improper safety documentation with Grant's initials, falsified signatures. When HR confronted him, he tried to shift blame, said I was disgruntled, claimed I'd been erratic. But when they pulled my logs, every detail, every assignment, there was nothing. Just spotless compliance, clean execution. Grant was suspended pending termination review. He cleared out his office a week later. I watched him walk out carrying a cardboard box, eyes sunken, face pale. For a moment, he saw me across the floor, and for the first time in our entire history, he looked unsure, like a man who didn't know the rules anymore. I didn't smile, didn't nod, just turned back to the console and logged the next cycle like any other day. A month later, I was promoted to shift lead. Quietly, no speeches, no ceremony, but my ID badge changed colors, and I was handed a key to the control room. That was enough. Dana and I paid off the last of our hospital debt this spring. Jake's turning 10 soon. I never told either of them the full story. Some things are better left in the dark, but every time I walk past Furnace 3, I feel the hum of the system underfoot, the pressure, the heat, the waiting. And I remember, predators don't always hunt from above. Sometimes they come from below, quiet, patient, and when they rise, they burn everything down. This last story is titled The Office Snake Who Chose the Wrong Target. My name's Ryan. I spent 15 years grinding in an industry built on thankless fixes: routers, servers, security panels, anything that blinked or beeped in a modern building. Field technician is the fancy term. What it really means is, you're the guy who gets called when the Wi-Fi goes down, the cameras go blind, or someone forgets how to set up their printer. I wasn't flashy, but I was solid. Never missed a job. Never billed incorrectly. Always left things cleaner than I found them. I built a quiet reputation in my territory, a patch of urban sprawl where offices, warehouses, and private firms all knew me by name. The work was dirty and unglamorous, but I took pride in it. Until Keith showed up. Keith was my trainee. Late 30s, ex-military, all sharp angles and white teeth. On the surface, he was friendly, asked the right questions, cracked jokes during lunch breaks, listened when I laid out the unspoken rules of our work, but there was a strange glint behind those eyes. He remembered too much, cataloged people like machines, and he asked questions he had no business asking. How much does this job bill for? Which of your clients tip? Do you use a third-party scheduler or handle appointments yourself? Red flags, but I was too tired and too naive. I shared more than I should have. Thought I was mentoring someone who'd carry the torch. Turns out I was training my replacement. 18 months after Keith joined, I was terminated. The official reason was performance inconsistency. A canned phrase, no documentation, no warnings, just an escort out of the building and a thin envelope with a final paycheck. It wasn't until 3 weeks later that I found out Keith had been promoted supervisor of field ops for our entire region. And my former clients? Most had been rerouted to him personally. I spiraled. Years of my life, gone, along with my health insurance, my reputation, and my marriage. My wife, Claire, was already 1 foot out the door, resentful of the missed dinners, the birthday parties I couldn't attend, the stress I brought home like grime under my nails. Getting fired was the final excuse she needed. Within 6 months, she moved out with our daughter and started over in Colorado. I got a lawyer I could barely afford and a visitation schedule that broke me. The first year after the firing was a blur. I couch surfed, took odd jobs, installed bootleg surveillance systems in cash businesses and patchy startups. It was survival mode, nothing else. But in survival mode, you learn. I learned the tools that weren't in the technician manuals. Open source monitoring scripts, hidden backdoors in commercial security panels, the weaknesses in cloud management platforms most people never think about. You learn which companies cut corners on firmware, which forget to lock down their internal networks. And most of all, I learned patience. Revenge wasn't a flare-up. It wasn't yelling into a void or slashing someone's tires. It was cold, surgical, and it started 2 years after my firing. I was reading an industry trade newsletter when I saw Keith's name, featured in a glowing interview, praised for modernizing regional operations and rebuilding client relationships. His smirk stared back from the article, same fake warmth, same precise haircut. He wasn't just surviving, he was thriving. And that's when I started to dig. The old credentials still worked. It was lazy on their part, a mistake by IT. I shouldn't have been able to access the back-end portal for the company's client scheduling system, but I could. Not everything, but enough. First I looked at my old territory. Keith had kept nearly all of it. Clients I'd built over a decade were now regulars on his calendar. I recognized their names, addresses, even the problems logged, servers I used to patch blindfolded, security cams I had personally installed. He hadn't even changed the configurations, just slapped his name on top. So I made a list. Not of Keith, of the clients. I started reaching out. Low profile, discreet, freelance technician, specializing in small business infrastructure. I offered discounts, quick fixes, faster turnarounds. Some didn't bite, but others remembered me. One by one, I pried them back. Quietly. No announcements. Just gaps appearing on Keith's calendar. Reassignments. Clients calling the company, saying, "We're going with someone else." That was phase 1. Phase 2 was trickier. I needed access. Real access. Fortunately, not all systems are smart. 3 years ago, I had installed a commercial-grade security package for a logistics firm: door sensors, internal cameras, even biometric check-ins. Keith now serviced them, according to the logs. What he didn't know was that I'd left myself a ghost account. No active permissions, no visibility in the GUI, just raw access via direct port, the kind no one would find unless they knew where to look. I watched for weeks, not out of voyeurism, out of calculation. Keith showed up late, marked his arrival an hour early, left jobs half done, signed invoices for work he didn't complete. It wasn't a one-off, it was a pattern. I copied everything, timestamped footage, digital logs, even forged client signatures from past work orders. Then I did the same for 3 other locations. I built a case, but I still wasn't ready. Not yet. One night, I drove past the tech company's regional hub, parked across the street. It was 11:37 p.m. on a Thursday. I watched the building for over an hour. I wasn't looking for anything specific, just remembering the feeling of standing inside, the smell of burnt coffee and ozone, the sting of betrayal. I realized something that night. I didn't just want Keith gone. I wanted his world to crumble. I knew from the start this wasn't going to be clean. You don't burn down a man's life and walk away without getting soot on your hands. But I wasn't looking for clean. I was looking for final. Keith had made himself untouchable inside the company. Promotions, bonuses, employee of the quarter. That kind of armor doesn't crack with rumors, it takes wrecking balls. I had 3. The first was internal. I sent an anonymous dossier to the company's compliance department. Encrypted, timestamped, it contained 5 detailed case reports of falsified time entries, billing discrepancies, and client complaints, all tied to Keith. I included internal security footage, geolocation metadata, and even recordings from his field calls, where he bragged about padding the bill. I knew the lingo. I structured the packet exactly like an internal audit report. Every claim was sourced, every number traceable. The second wrecking ball hit the legal side. 2 of the clients Keith had shortchanged agreed to give statements. I didn't push, just showed them the data. They were pissed. Not just about the money, about being lied to. One was a mid-sized real estate firm with an in-house legal team. They didn't send angry emails, they filed a formal complaint and started proceedings for contract breach. Suddenly, the company had a real problem. And the third wrecking ball? That was personal. See? Keith's entire persona was built on perception. Veteran, family man, community contributor. I found out his daughter went to a private school that held an annual tech fundraiser. Keith was on the committee, so I sent them a packet too. Nothing illegal, just a curated selection of his texts and messages from the back-end system where he'd mocked clients, used racial slurs, and joked about scamming hours. Within 2 weeks, he was quietly removed from the committee. But I wasn't done. The final move wasn't flashy. It wasn't even illegal. I rebuilt my client base, over 20 businesses in the same territory Keith once stole from me. I charged less, responded faster, and never missed a job. Word spread. I got my reputation back, and then some. By the time Keith realized what was happening, I'd bled him out. I found out from a mutual contact how it ended. Keith was called into a regional review. The compliance team had dug deeper, found 6 more falsified accounts, evidence of backdated invoices, and violations of client trust protocols. HR couldn't save him. His boss, someone I had trained a decade earlier, signed the termination order personally. They didn't even let him clear his desk. Poetic. What happened after? Not much. I didn't gloat, didn't reach out. I didn't need to. I already knew. He lost the job, the clearance, and most of his clients. His name still lingered in the industry, but now it was whispered with disgust, not respect. One of the last messages I got from that old back-end system before the company finally scrubbed access was a mass internal memo titled New Ethics Initiative. I smiled when I saw it. I got a text from one of the old clients last month. "Thanks for everything, Ryan. Wish we'd never switched." That one hit harder than they probably meant it to. As for me, I'm stable now. My business is small but strong. I see my daughter every other weekend, and I never miss her school events. I spend more time with her in a month than I did in a year back then. She doesn't know the details, just that daddy works for himself now, and he's always around. That's enough. I never got an apology, never heard from Keith again, but in the end, I didn't need to. He took everything from me, so I returned the favor.